nods at me. He said, if you want to get big and strong, you got to eat your vegetables. and I looked at him and I said, are you asking?
Next one. Let's switch gears for a moment.
You're not going to beat up on me anymore.
Yeah.
Still more.
It'd probably just be a little bit more of the same. We were talking earlier about carbohydrates and kind of how they can help with, I guess somebody making their diet more optimal for performance and things like that. And so you were kind of mentioning that, having good amount of protein in your diet is something that is going to help with protein synthesis and stuff like that. So I'd like to open up some dialogue and talk about this a little bit more, because there are people that, like, if I say like war on carbs, if I say like I like, eating meat, or it's World Carnivore Month, people are like, well, why don't you just eat carbs? And for me, it's not necessarily that the carbs are going to do anything bad. I don't believe that they're going to make me fat. It just throws my diet off. I like to be kind of locked in on my diet, and it's World Carnivore Month, so I'm taking it as a challenge as well. How well can people perform on a diet that doesn't really have hardly any carbohydrates, and what happens to the body when we're not eating carbs? You were mentioning your glucose goes up, but how does your glucose go up when you don't eat any carbs?
Yeah, well, I mean, our body is very good at defending and leaving us in a homeostatic place. It doesn't matter, what our sodium intake is. We tightly regulate. Our acid-base balance is tightly regulated. And even though I don't eat carbohydrates or any appreciable amount of it, my blood glucose never goes to zero. I mean, you just can't exist.
Nor would you want it to.
Nor would I want it to. I mean, it can get pretty low, and there's some interesting studies Cahill did in the 60s where he starved people. Got them starving, where their blood glucose was 40, milligrams per deciliter, and then he would give them insulin on top of that, and then they'd be down to 10.
Yeah.
And normally that would kill most people, but because they were compensating, they did well with that. But I mean, because I eat a lot of protein and to some degree fat, I eat plenty of calories. There's something called gluconeogenesis. Most of us are aware of. You can turn amino acids into glucose, and you can turn the glycerol from triglycerides into glucose, and that stores in your liver. And you just have it, and you become very efficient at that. And also your muscle glycogen is refilled, maybe not to the extent that you would with carbohydrates. But I mean, again, how much do you actually need to perform? We had a good workout. I mean, I would say I hung with everybody pretty well, and it was
great.
And I think that's something that you can do very well with that. And I've got there's guys in the NFL now on the carnivore diet. There's professional MMA fighters on the carnivore diet. They're all doing well. It's not for everyone, for sure. There are people that just don't feel very good with that, and I don't know why that is yet. And I mean, there's some people that don't eat enough. One of the things Stan and I talked about is fueling yourself properly. And if you just don't have an appetite and then you expect yourself to go perform at a world-class level, that's going to be hard to do. So you have to be able to eat, and carbohydrates help you to eat more. There's some impacts on some of the satiety hormones. We know there's studies that support that. So you can eat more, which is going to have an impact. We also know that, carbohydrates are going to be very effective at restoring glycogen, which can be beneficial as well. I think that, when it comes to muscle building, can you build muscle without carbohydrates? Sure you can. Is it the most optimal, most effective and efficient way? Probably not. I mean, I think as much of the studies we have, you can point to flaws in all these studies. You can say, what else are you looking at? When I look at, who are the biggest, strongest guys on the planet, when I look at bodybuilders, they're all eating a high protein diet for sure. They're all training their asses off with mostly high volume in many cases, but they're eating some carbohydrate as well. And I think that's, the effect may be a performance benefit. It may be an appetite and calorie benefit. And so I think that's important. But I mean, again, do you have to do it that way? No, you don't. And there's reasons, like for some people, and perhaps as we get older, carbohydrates become problematic because then like we said, the positive benefits of supporting appetite may be negative because you may eat to get too much body fat if you're not matching it with training output. And the other thing is for some people, they have, I don't demonize carbohydrates or glucose, but what I do say is there are certain compounds and certain foods that are gut irritants. And Stan's done a very good job with the vertical diet and saying some of these foods just, negatively impact your gut. And so we need to know what they are. And in most of the diseases, I believe, start in the gut. These autoimmune diseases, mental health issues probably start in the gut, skin issues, psoriasis, all the things occur. So if you can fix your gut and heal your gut, and I think a lot of us are dealing with dysfunctional guts, dysbiosis, hyperpermeability, and that's probably because of the modern diet. So many people are eating just complete garbage diets. So we've ruined our gut. We've ruined our ability to properly process the nutrients in the good foods we should normally eat. And so we have people that now they can't tolerate whatever, certain fruits and vegetables, which sounds crazy, but it is what it is in many cases. And you have to restore that and fix that. And later on, like we see a lot of people, they'll do a carnivore diet for 3 months, 6 months. They'll deal with whatever issues they have, and then they can start adding food back in, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, eliminate and reintroduce.
Yeah.
I talk about that.
Your thoughts here with the carb in regards to carbs?
Yeah, I talked about this, I think, first on Mike Mutzel's podcast, where I discussed the fact that you can get to the top of the Empire State Building taking the stairs, but the elevator's probably a little faster, a little better idea. And then subsequently that on Paul Saladino's podcast, and I kind of went over the muscle physiology as we know it now, as compared to the way we used to think it. Again, as Shawn said, specifically for that 1% of the population that's looking for optimum performance, anaerobic training in particular, I think that the carbohydrates have demonstrated to provide the benefit of enabling you to get one more rep or do one more set, maybe give you a little more stamina and endurance in the gym for an anaerobic workout. And we see that there seems to be an equivalent benefit from getting fat adapted in terms of endurance. We're hard pressed to see the advantage of carbohydrates there, except for maybe in that given event over probably 90 minutes with every 15-minute periodic intake of carbs, salt, and water, as the ISSN recommends. But with respect to muscle physiology for that 1% of the population, the way that Brad Schoenfeld describes it in his book, Hypertrophy, what we see now is that we used to think the carbohydrates were stored in the muscle as one thing. And they would do that by grinding up the muscle and looking at the carbohydrate glycogen depletion for any given workout. And they said, well, you're only depleting 40% of your glycogen, so how could it be that big a deal? Well, apparently carbohydrates are stored in different locations. The sarcoplasm is one in particular that seems to be the last filled and the first depleted. And in the muscle, the sarcoplasm, those carbohydrates seem to trigger the calcium channel that is responsible for firing. That's the troponin, tropomyosin channel that allows for the cross-bridging for the actin myosin contractions. So for those who study muscle physiology, that'll be very familiar and probably somewhat rudimentary. But that's depleted first. And so that might, just like creatine, might give you in the creatine phosphate system one more rep by renewing that first 10 seconds. The first 30 seconds, having an abundance of carbohydrates available might help. There's also another component to that, and I think that's partly that some of hypertrophy isn't just the muscle fiber; it's the fluid in the sarcoplasm as well. And some of the hypertrophy benefits that are derived, probably as much as 20% potentially, could be from the fluid expansion and the compression of the cells provides a hypertrophy benefit, which you can obtain from more carbs, which obviously hold 3 parts water and then sodium. So there could be a muscle breakdown benefit. It's small, and it might help with adding one more rep, 5 more pounds, one more set throughout the workout. And the cumulative effect of that over time, this wouldn't be anything you'd see immediately. Although in powerlifting, we do find that the fuller we are, we used to intentionally try and get ourselves as loaded as possible right before a meet with some carb and salt loading, particularly after weigh-ins, would help with some of that compressive force with the muscles. So there's a benefit there. I also found that when you look at most of the diet literature, we talked about how important a carnivore diet can be, or an elimination diet might be for initial intervention for things like diabetes, for obesity, digestion issues. We talked about the FODMAP menu, and a whole host of other disorders that people present. Often I see present with on your website as well. It seems that people, like we said, 6 out of 7 people go on a diet, lose weight. The vast majority of them gain it back within a certain period of time, 1 to 3 years, up to probably 90%. It seems like when they go off the diet, they tend to migrate back towards a balance of proteins, fats, and carbs. We also see pretty good literature to suggest that that like a 40% carbohydrate. I hate to put a number on it. I will say that 30% or north of protein seems to be the most beneficial macronutrient that everybody should include. Where you put fats and carbs, as we saw in the Diet Fits trial out of Stanford, a 1-year trial on over 600 people, that where they put carbs and fats didn't seem to matter in terms of weight loss or insulin output. And we also see that in terms of these high glycemic versus low glycemic carbs. If you're controlled for calories and protein, if you eat high glycemic or low glycemic carbs, it doesn't seem to affect weight loss. And so it's really, like you mentioned, it's really a choice. What's your preference? What can you sustain over time? And how do you feel on the diet?
We've all heard that to get optimal sleep, you should cool your room down to 68 to 69 degrees. But that's not all you need to do. And that's why we've partnered with 8 Sleep mattresses. Now they have the Pod Pro and the Pod Pro Cover. And the amazing technology of this mattress allows you to cool the mattress down to 55 degrees or to have it as warm as 110 degrees. But the great thing is that the temperature changes through the night based off of your actual body temperature to make sure that you get the most restful sleep possible. You fall asleep 32% faster and you move around 40% less when you're actually asleep. It's amazing. And Andrew, how can people get it?
Yeah, this is amazing technology that actually changes its temperature based off of your sleep cycle. There's no other technology like it anywhere else. To take advantage of this, head over to 8sleep.com/power project. That's EIGHT sleep.com/power project. And you guys will receive $150 off this amazing technology. Links to them down in the description below. Let's get back to this video.
I'm curious about this because, Shawn, you've been doing carnivore for a long time. Do you think that there's, and Stan too, do you think that there's something that people need to think about as they age? Because we know that individuals' insulin resistance gets worse as they get older generally.
Yeah, I
right?
think you've eaten less carbs over the years, haven't you? Brought them down a bit.
Particularly if I'm not training at the same intensity or if I'm traveling and I don't want to be as hungry as often or as hangry. I don't get the same degree of hunger if I reduce carbs and increase proteins and fats. But it takes a few days to get, quote unquote, fat adapted. We see that with like those oral glucose tolerance tests, et cetera. If you're fat adapted and you go in and hit yourself with a shot of glucola, you're going to spike and it's going to look crazy. Yeah. So you have to kind of reintroduce carbs before you do something like that. So your body will respond acutely based on your current level of adaptation.
Yeah, I mean, you specifically asked about
Like
as you
older
get older.
Yeah,
I,
especially
you know,
athletes.
as much as I hate to admit that, I'll include myself there now. I kind of keep thinking I'm in my 20s, but I think some of the misconceptions that I find out there is that older athletes can't train hard, and I think there's some issues around. You need to, you can only do a third of what you could do in your 20s. I'm not finding that. I mean, I continue to train hard. Stan, I saw a funny post of you about talking about, when I was going in and maxing every day, I was hitting 600-pound bench, and now I'm listening to the science. I'm down to whatever 400 or something like that. Yeah. But I think there's this expectation that as I get older, I'm just going to get weaker, and I'm not going to be able to train hard. And I think that's a problem. That's setting yourself up for failure. And I don't approach it that way. I'm like, I want to, for instance, I mean, today we did these deadlifts. This was a lifetime PR for me. I hit today 2 days shy of my 55th.
22 reps, 415 pounds, trap bar deadlifts.
Yeah, and dead stop. That was the thing. I wanted to make sure it was dead stop.
Turn the camera on and have Andrei Milanichev screaming in your ear. It's bound to do that.
Yeah, it helps. But I mean, it's something that, and I haven't been doing it my whole life. I'd say for the last maybe 4 or 5 years, I've been playing with that. And so at least I'm better than I was 4 or 5 years ago. And so I think that one is that, again, is the average person in the U.S. and even the average gym goer is probably under eating protein. Like Stan and I both think 30% is kind of the minimum bar of entry for protein consumption. If maybe you're up 40, 50%. If you're trying to get leaner, you might even have more protein in there. But so I think that has a uniquely beneficial effect on your ability to, stay strong, keep the lean muscle mass. And then for me, I find that for whatever reason, a carnivore diet allows me to recover better. And so, like I said, I'm doing jiu-jitsu now. I'm still training hard. I'm doing all these things. And I find that, I'll wake up tomorrow and I'm going to train hard again. Yeah. And, whereas maybe if I were in a different situation, and I'm not saying one diet, but a standard American diet, I think it's inflammatory in general. For whatever reason, you can
70% processed food.
Yeah, you can put the processed food there. It's probably the biggest.
Well, fat. Fat is inflammatory.
Body fat. Body fat. Yeah, body fat. Yeah, there's inflammatory cytokines. Yeah, so I mean, it's one of those things where if you can stay lean and strong, I think you can train even old. And my goal is when I'm 90, I'm hoping I'm coming to Super Training Gym with these guys, and we're going to do some deadlifts. I mean, that's the plan.
Yeah. Let me jump in here and say a couple of things if I can recall. I should have had my pen and paper out. One thing in particular is that a lot of people think, and some of the literature suggested, I think even when Jorn Tromlin did his PhD, he did a PhD on protein metabolism, and a lot of the information that we've been utilizing about protein comes from his work and others. We talked about the fact that people become less sensitive muscle protein synthesis as they age. But more and more of the recent research suggests that's because of sarcopenia. It's because they lost muscle and aren't using it as much or maybe as heavy as they used to. And so I would suggest to say that lifting and building muscle at irrespective of age, I don't think we see it until we get much older even, obviously into our 60s or 70s where we start to see a decline. We're seeing now that people in their 50s and older are retaining muscle protein synthesis from an equivalent bolus of protein at 40 grams for maybe 100% maximization of muscle protein synthesis. Another thing you said with respect to you just recover better and feel stronger on steak and eggs. Couple components of that. Mental Henselman wrote about this recently, and Alan Oregon's done some research on this as well and printed on it. Cholesterol. It does appear when you look at two groups of people who have equivalent calories and protein intake. One group has egg whites, the other group has whole eggs. That the whole egg group is getting a much greater hypertrophy and strength outcome as a result. And the presumption initially was micronutrients, and now it's suggested from subsequent studies that it's possibly the cholesterol that's providing us the benefit. Thank you. I managed to remember those two things. I appreciate it. And obviously saturated fat's a contributor to that, and the thing to watch out for is if you do have a propensity to a predisposition to accumulate LDLs as a result of that if you're not clearing them fast enough. Although exercise certainly helps with that. But cholesterol. And I've mentioned this with respect to kids' diets. I've told the story before about I was at the airport and I was standing behind a gentleman with two young boys, probably, 7 and 9 years old. And he turned around, he looked at me and he's like, "See, boys," he said, "I'm telling you." He nods at me. He said, "If you want to get big and strong, you got to eat your vegetables." and I looked at him and I said, Are you asking? And he goes, "Yeah, tell him." And I said, "Boys, if you want to get big and strong, you got to eat steak, eggs, and milk." And he kind of looked at me and shocked, but I'm dead serious. If I'm the guy who we've discussed before, who had delayed onset puberty because I was working at 7-Eleven and eating the crap there, the hot dogs and nacho cheese pump crackers and soda pops from the time I was 12 to the time I was 16. And it's not until I went back to Pennsylvania my senior year of high school and lived with my uncle that I started eating steaks and bacon and lard. And the neighbor had a dairy farm where we got whole milk straight from the cow with the 4 inches of cream on the top in the glass bottle that you had to shake. And next thing you know, I put on 20 pounds in 6 months, went through puberty finally as a 17-year-old senior in high school. So there is a foundation that's necessary and beneficial. And so that's why I did a video talking about the importance of cholesterol, the importance of whole eggs, and even I talked about eating chicken. What did I say? Instead of chicken breast, eating chicken thigh. Yeah. Higher in cholesterol and easier and more fun to eat. And again, the caveat to that being, this is for a fit, individual who doesn't have adverse effects, and only a blood test can really tell you, where you fall in terms of that genetic predisposition.
Dr. Baker, have you ever had any pain and injuries and stuff like that, like prior to the carnivore diet? Like, what were some of the struggles before? Because you've been on it for 5 years, and we see how well you're thriving now. But you were a Highland Games athlete previously, did some rugby. Did you end? Because it doesn't seem like you have any pain now. It seems like you're kicking ass.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is my whole career. I realized the importance of hardening my body for those athletic activities. I was training. I was trying to prepare myself. I'm kind of an over preparer. I'm not particularly tough, so I like to be over prepared. So so when it's time to compete, you're like, it's not so bad for you. But I mean, I did have some very significantly and severe quadriceps tendonitis. And I remember I was squatting one time, I was doing a 500-pound squat, and I had a little pop right above my kneecap. And so I think I partially tore my quadriceps. And I was working, my orthopedic surgeon partner, we took some x-rays and there was nothing major, but it was just enough. And it hurt me, for about 8 years prior to going on a carnivore. And, it would affect my ability to train, because some days, when your knees hurt, you don't feel like squatting or you don't feel like training. And I went on carnivore, and I remember about 2 months, and as an orthopedic surgeon, I was dealing with tendonitis all the time. And so I knew what to do from the literature, all the different, eccentric loading and stretching and all these other modalities we have to treat that. And I tried all those things, and it never went away. I went on a carnivore diet, and I noticed within 2 months, my quadriceps tendonitis, which had bothered me literally every day for 8 years, went away completely. And it's never come back, which I thought was really, really interesting. Now, do I occasionally get strains and aches and pains now because I still train pretty hard? Yeah. I mean, when I get done with a hard night of jujitsu, the next day I'm kind of like, But I mean, it's generally so much better now at 55 than it was, 10, 15 years ago at 40 and 45. So it's clearly better.
Hey, little mama, let me whisper in your ear. Like, comment, subscribe to the channel, because we continue to bring you peak content on this channel. Obviously, you guys are here. You guys have watched the whole video. So like, comment, subscribe. All right. See you later.